as a way to try to limit the power of the Virginians and try to gain more power for himself, the king carved off part of the Virginia Company's claims, the northern part. Remember, the king had taken over the charter in our previous lesson, but the king had taken over the charter and made Virginia a crown colony, wants to divide and conquer. So he carves off the northern territories of the Virginia charter and establishes there the colony of Maryland. The small Maryland colony, which originally was the northern chunk of the Virginia Company, he then grants to Lord Calvert, the first Lord of Baltimore, who establishes there a Catholic colony. Lord Baltimore is a Catholic. He wants to establish a colony that's going to be a religious haven for Catholics. So you are seeing the three G's of gold, glory, God play once again into motivations for the establishment of a colony. What happens over time in Maryland, though, is Protestants come in increasing numbers and migrate to Maryland as well as everywhere else, and they begin outnumbering the Catholics in what was supposed to be a Catholic colony. As an act that's going to have some linkage and consequences for later on down the road, as they're about to be politically outnumbered, the Catholics in Maryland passed what is known as the Act of Toleration. The Act of Toleration was an act that was going to allow for the ability to pursue your religious faith. And that they were actually using to protect themselves as Catholics, so that once Protestants came in, they couldn't be outvoted and buried, but they said you were going to be allowed to pursue your religious faith unmolested as long as you profess the divinity of Jesus. And as such, it's a step, like our other steps, the House of Burgesses, linkage, like our other step, the Mayflower Compact, linkage, a building block into this notion of religious toleration in the New World, even if it's a very limited model of it. It's a crack in the door that's going to open, that'll be opened much later on, much further as we'll see. On to New England. As our New England colonies establish and grow, by now you should be aware of the fact that New England colonies were more successful from the beginning because of the nature of the people coming over as a ready-made society. You should know the New England colonies from the beginning had similar relations to those of the Virginia colonies with the Indians, did not have a lot of use for the Native Americans. And you should know by now as well that these colonies did not maintain this whole city on a hill model of we're all in it together. And our first slide on New England addresses this with the issue of Puritan dissent. A dissenter, it's a good term to use in your AP papers or your AP work. It's speaking the language of a historian. A dissenter, for lack of a better term, would be a disagreeer. Somebody who does not go along with the traditional orthodoxy of whatever message is being told in any time and place. There's two key dissenters in the New England colony that we're going to talk about. As New England grows, not everyone is under that same big tent anymore in population. You start to get some differences in worldviews. The first of these is Roger Williams. Roger Williams proved to be a threat to the New England order, the political order of New England, because he believed in two things. First of all, he believed in, as a Puritan, he began to think over time that having the Puritan religion required by law, he said was a giant fraud. Because he said, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing, God knows who's going to church because they want to be there and who's going to church because they're being compelled to be there because they get arrested if they don't. He said, we're only fooling ourselves. So he was actually preaching what would be argued as complete freedom of conscience. Let people make their own religious choices and free will along those lines, so that we're not kidding ourselves as a republic or as this small little city on the hill and just saying, yes, aren't we all great because we're all in it together, we're all in church. See how good we're all praying when everyone's all there because they sort of have to be there because it's against the law if you didn't. Secondly, and even more dangerous for Puritan rule, is he felt the Native Americans ought to be fully compensated for their lands as the English took them. Now, there's no way the Puritans or the Massachusetts Bay Company is going to be able to come up with the kind of funding they need to take all the land they want, because they have this much, and all they want is all the rest of it they can get. There'll be no way they can write a check that big. And so as such, they initially tell Roger Williams to muzzle and contain his remarks, and ultimately they say he's so much of a threat, they threaten they're going to expel him. The night before he's going to be shipped back to England, he fled the colony and establishes his own settlement in Providence, which is going to be the nucleus around which the colony of Rhode Island will build. This colony will wind up having complete freedom of conscience, complete separation of church and state, the ability to believe that which you choose to believe. It was seen as a colony of dissenters in many ways. Anne Hutchinson, another dissenter of note, for two different reasons. First of all, she preached that she disagreed with the Puritans on matters of theology. She disagreed with the Puritan leadership, which is trouble enough. It's trouble for Roger Williams. Second, though, she was a woman. She was a female disagreeing with the notions of what the church and the state ought to be doing and how they ought to be getting along. This was seen as more of a social threat as well as theocratic or theological debate. You've got a gender debate now with a woman who should not really have a voice in Puritan view, trying to make claims that she believes that all people have an inner light to God they can find on their own through introspection. And this really went against an awful lot of Puritan teachings, and so she fled the colony, ultimately going to Rhode Island, and was banished from Massachusetts in many ways, being seen as a heretic by the Massachusetts group. But it shows you how, and this will be a long-standing theme in American history, anyone that tries to set up their own perfectionist society, their own utopia, they've got a really hard time keeping that universal agreement for any length of time. Because once you start to have differences of opinion within the fold, within the theoretical family, if you will, this extended family, the group starts to break down because not everyone begins to think the same thing. And you can't have unanimity then in these larger groups as they get bigger. Thomas Hooker of Connecticut, who establishes Connecticut, New Haven, same sort of model. A group of Puritans who fracture off because they're dissatisfied with some of the rules and the orders that the Puritans are following, and they have disagreement, and in the New World, they're not compelled to sit there and take it. They've got other alternatives, and the alternatives they have is like Roger Williams in Rhode Island, like the indentured servants for different reasons in Virginia, they can vote with their feet. They can leave, and so they leave the colony, heading into the Connecticut River Valley and establishing the colony of New Haven, where they establish another modest building block of American democracy. You should by now know about the Mayflower Compact. You should by now know about the Virginia House of Burgesses. And here's a new one you should by now want to include in that is going to be the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. So we're a step closer. The Mayflower Compact was not a formal constitution. It was more like a general set of guidelines. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut is a truly modern constitution. It's a governing document that provides for a representative government elected by a popular vote, and then a governor who is going to come from that body. The body itself will pick from among their own. They'll vote on who the governor is going to be. So it establishes a more clear-cut, unified, in-ink, codified notion of what this representative government thing is going to look like. So talk about linkage, events having causes and growing organically to new events. From here to here to here to here, we're seeing steps being taken, blocks being laid to go down a building block path towards the American model of democracy. Now, these people didn't know they were doing that. They weren't conscious of, gosh, in 100 years or 50 years or 75 years, whatever it's going to be, we're setting all things in place that's going to lead to the birth of a new country. That's not the direction they were going in. But these events will move and they will take on momentum of their own, and they're also going to be part of the political and mental baggage of our colonials later on down the line. These are the foundational pillars of the societies in which they grew up. And that's important. It's just as important as the baggage they shipped with them from England in their suitcases and their steamer trunks. It's the baggage they bring up here and the baggage they bring here that comes with them. This heritage of a certain worldview on government, democracy, politics, freedom, liberty, order, tyranny, etc. But we'll get there when we get there.